Good evening and welcome to Bugajski Hour. I'm happy to be back again in Tirana to examine important global and local developments that affect the lives of all Albanians. And today I will also be in Pristina, in Kosovo, for a discussion with a major political personality. And our guest on the Bugajski hot seat is Albin Kurti, leader of the Vete Vendosia movement. But first, my political commentary on an important international topic is entitled Europe's Radical Dominoes. The election triumph of the radical left in Greece has sent shivers throughout Europe in anticipation of further populist victories. Southern Europe in particular is vulnerable to radical appeals given the failures of the political establishment and the poor state of national economies. The ultra-left avoids references to previous failed communist experiments in Europe. Nonetheless, there is little new in their ideological dogmas. Capitalism and neoliberalism are the main enemies. America is still an imperialist power, and Russia must be supported because it opposes US global dominance. There is also little innovation in the radical left's policy prescriptions. At its core is the conviction that the state should own strategic industries. Despite historic evidence to the contrary, they believe that governments are more productive than markets and that collective ownership controlled by state managers is more efficient than private property. The sole reason the ultra-left has gained significant public support is the prolonged economic recession that has hit Greece, Spain, Portugal, and Italy the hardest. Voters believe that all major parties have contributed to economic failure and are riddled with corruption. The radicals offer simple solutions, but their programs are based on one fundamental fallacy, that the government has unlimited sources of money. Austerity measures were implemented by several governments in order to obtain desperately needed loans. As part of debt deals, governments were required to cut public costs by billions of euros. Syriza's victory in Greece will now encourage the populist left in other states to believe they can terminate austerity and increase spending. Spain and Italy will hold elections over the next 2 years. In Spain, the Podemos movement is gaining in strength as general elections approach in December. With unemployment standing at 24% and poverty growing, Podemos leads public opinion polls with about a quarter of the vote. It has asserted that it will write off part of Spain's debt if it wins the elections. Italy is another far-left target, where financial problems are combined with the sagging economy, massive unemployment, and widespread poverty. Italian leftist parties such as Rifondazione Comunista and the Left Ecology Freedom will try to ride on Syriza's coattails and to apply their own Greek myths. It is time for the Bugajski hot seat, a special program today from Pristina, and my guest today, second time on our show, is Albin Kurti, leader of the self-determination movement here in Kosovo, Vete Vendosia. Thank you for inviting us to your splendid headquarters. It's always a pleasure to be back in Pristina, and thank you for coming back on my show.
Thank you very much for having me again.
A lot of questions, a lot of things have happened since we last spoke, as they always do in the region, but particularly in Kosovo. Let me begin with a sort of very basic question, which is, I suppose, the foundation of the name of your party, self-determination. Kosovo celebrated the 7th anniversary of its independence. Is Kosovo really independent? Is it an independent state?
I think it is independent in letter, in paper, but not in its reality, neither socioeconomic nor political and institutional. We declared independence 7 years ago, but our independence on one hand lacks sovereignty and territorial integrity, on the other hand lacks economic development which would bring well-being for its citizens. I think that 7 years after, we continue to have two main problems. The first one is divided town of Mitrovica, and the second one is huge unemployment. I think that once we resolve these two problems, that is going to be much more important than the declaration of independence itself.
Well, when I say independence, in terms of international role in Kosovo's development, in other words, is Kosovo fully self-determined? Does it determine its future? Does it determine its internal policy? Does it determine its foreign policy? I was thinking in those terms, is Kosovo independent?
I'm afraid that in those terms too, Kosovo is not independent either, because our independence is not full, and on the other hand, is not truthful. Is not full in the sense that EULEX replaced UNMIC, just like EU influence replaced UN influence, but within the same paradigm of short-term political stability instead of having sustainable economic development. And people from EULEX, they have immunity from criminal prosecution, just like those from UNMIC. They have executive powers which are not limited neither in time nor in scope. They do not recognize our independence. You do not have a single case where an EULEX official reported to Kosovar institutions, let alone the parliament. You might hear them giving lectures to private universities and colleges all over Kosovo, but not in the parliament, to the elected representatives of the people of Kosovo. And again, like UNMIC, they take care that in Kosovo we have peace, we have security, but not much of justice, democracy. And I think that this is so sad 16 years after liberation of Kosovo. If it would have been 16 weeks after liberation of Kosovo, okay, but 16 years after, we should have gone way earlier for democracy, justice, and development, where natural consequence of this, of course, is peace, security, and stability.
So what should happen with the EULEX mission?
Well, I think that we need local prosecutors to combat organized crime and corruption. Elliot Ness was not a Frenchman, so we need our domestic Elliot Ness, who is going to fight corruption, high-level corruption and organized crime, and perhaps EU could help us a lot with advice, but not be on the driver's seat, as it is the case now. EULEX in 6.5 years spent €1.5 billion euros of taxpayers' money from EU countries, and I think it has been a failure. It was not only unjust, it has been a failure. We should replace EULEX executive powers with EU advice for our local prosecutors on one hand, and on the other hand, we should bring more experts from EU to help us develop, rather than to discipline politically the institutional establishment of Kosovo, where the files of the corruption are not really used for prosecution to bring about justice, but rather to keep short-term stability. Mr. Soren Jessen-Petersen, now a retired diplomat, a couple of years ago came to Kosovo. He used to be head of UNMIC. And in a live TV show, he said, whenever we tried to arrest some important personality for war crimes or organized crime or high-level corruption, he said to the journalist, you cannot imagine who called us one day in advance to stop in the name of stability. And you know, we're thinking, who actually called him? Was it George Bush, Pope? Was it Elvis? You know,
Elliot Ness?
Yeah, I think that, and he didn't say who, but one can imagine that stability had absolute priority over justice. And I think that EULEX have raised hopes among Kosovars. Okay, now EU is not going to be UN, it's going to be much better, but it's not about the nationality of the people. It's about the model, it's about the goals, it's about the paradigm, and that didn't change much. So we need EU to develop, but we had enough of EU justice, I must say.
So you need the EU really as a mission that helps you to meet the conditions to eventually enter the EU, rather than holding you back.
Yes, I think that UNMIC did not help us to get a seat in UN. Likewise, EULEX is not helping us to become members into EU. And just like UN, also EU cannot think of Kosovo and at the same time not think of Serbia as well. Because they operate with consensus. Out of 28 countries, 23 recognize us. But paradoxically, these 5 countries who do not recognize us have a greater say, because they balance these 23, and in a way, EU is status neutral when it comes to Kosovo. So if you combine this with the fact that Kosovo has no alternative, we are oriented toward EU, while Serbia is not like us. Serbia says that they do have an alternative, and in a way, this comes at our disadvantage. Instead of Kosovo's advantage being that we say EU full stop, suddenly it is Serbia who is better off because they present EU as one of their choices, because they might go toward Russia as well. So, and I think that there has been a great injustice to Kosovar people, to state of Kosovo regarding this issue by Brussels.
I want to come back to some of the international questions, including relations with Serbia. But let me sort of continue on the internal picture. I mean, a vital component of any democracy are sound institutions, rule of law, minimized corruption. No country is without some corruption, but let's say checks and balances, that that is not pervasive, that doesn't control the state. How much would you say progress, if any, has Kosovo made during its period of independence?
I don't think that we made much progress, and I think that any kind of small progress somewhere in different municipalities and so on does not really make any significant change. So I cannot speak of progress at all, I must say. And I think that EU, through its mission here, did not have as a priority progress in rule of law. So it cannot happen when it's not really your goal. It was mainly to keep things calm. It was mainly while thinking how it can get worse, what we can lose, not the logic of progress, what we can gain, how it can get better. So a very conservative approach in negative sense. And I cannot speak of progress at all by EU in Kosovo. I think that they wanted to prove that EU is one of the superpowers in the world. Now when world is becoming, I don't know, let's say multipolar, EU, as Shakespeare said, world is a stage. You know, EU wants a place in that stage and as one of the superpowers. And mediation is hegemony, you know. Like mediating in the conflict between Kosovo and Serbia raises your credits. And in a way, I think that in one level, both Kosovo and Serbia has been used by some bureaucrats to show that, you know, EU can manage crises around the world, EU can bring reconciliation out of conflicting parts and so on. But I think that that was more of a PR than a substantial change, because the so-called normalization of relations between Kosovo and Serbia rather abnormalized Kosovo further on, and unfortunately it only used Kosovo for steps of Serbia toward EU. I think that neither Kosovo nor Serbia are normal countries. I think we're both abnormal countries. We, because we did not fulfill the state building process. Serbia, because it never faced its own criminal past during disintegration of Yugoslavia. And normalization of relations between two abnormal entities adds to abnormality. So I think rather we should have normal Serbia, normal Kosovo, and then normal relations. But this is not the approach of EU, I'm afraid.
But surely, I don't know if you agree, with this short-term stability that the EU is looking for means longer-term insecurity. Because if you do not cure those problems, such as corruption, rule of law, early on, they have a way of festering and spreading throughout the system, which is, I think, what we're seeing in Kosovo.
Yes, and I think that leadership has been replaced with management, where management reflects a certain mandate of certain officials in certain positions. There is no vision. I think that EU had more vision before than now. After a failure of European Constitution, after this mild Lisbon Treaty, after especially financial crisis, when we are okay economically, we are together. After crisis, everybody goes to his own home. I think that there is a crisis of vision, and there is too much of management. And I think this has reflected upon us as well. So they are much more preoccupied about future conflict reoccurring in the Balkans rather than healing the wounds of the previous ones.
Well, going back again to the domestic situation, what is your view of the new government? You've been very critical of previous governments in Kosovo. Do you think it's just a continuation, same as before?
I'm afraid that the new government is neither new nor government. It's not new because there are old actors with old mindsets, with old aims. And it's not a government because it's rather an administration which serves to implement the results of Brussels dialogue on one hand, and on the other hand is an administration of two joint ventures. One joint venture being Bechtel Enka, which brings the smooth, expensive asphalt, and on the other hand is this joint venture Limak Çelik, which privatized distribution and supply of KEK, Electro-Energy Corporation, but at the same time took over the airport, international airport of Pristina. So I think neither economically nor politically we don't have anything new, and this entity cannot be really called a government. We are going to see more of the same. But at the same time, I think that despite big numbers, they are weak as a government. We maybe do not have big numbers as opposition, but we are stronger than ever. And this has been seen with the latest two demonstrations in Pristina. So I don't think that Kosovo is poor and unemployed because of the culture of society, because of the resources of the country, or because of the history of the people. We are poor and with huge unemployment because of the wrong economic model, which relies on privatization and asphalt without any kind of strategy for development. We have been trying 15 years right-wing governments with neoliberal policy. I think it's time to try some social democracy in Kosovo.
I was going to come back to you about the socialist aspect of
that would change, I believe, things. When it comes to this government, I think Isa Mustafa and Hashim Thaçi, they are both deputies of each other without none of them being prime minister.
But is it a question of socialism or, as you say, right-wing? Most of the East European countries pursued, after the fall of communism, a very liberal, laissez-faire policy, which was very successful in the case of a country like Poland, for example, or Slovakia. Why cannot this work in Kosovo? It's not a question, I think, of free enterprise. Isn't it a question of liberating, enabling people to work and to have free enterprise? In other words, is there too much restriction, corruption, government interference here, rather than the opposite?
Well, I am not in favor of any kinds of universal approach to economic development. I think that what helps one country at a certain time in history cannot help another country at some other point in history. So I think we have to be really careful. You have to see your resources. You have to see how you can bring about development as an internal affair, which can be helped from outside, and not the other way around, like NATO saved us, liberated us. Now let's wait for EU to develop us, to save us. It's not going to happen. So I think with this huge poverty we have, with huge unemployment, some kind of developmental state, not to control the economy, not to centralize the economy, not to...
You don't want to go back to social...
No, not at all. But neither to be a spectator to economic developments. Some kind of orientation, some kind of subsidies for farmers, some kind of industrialization in energy and mining, would be very helpful. I know that services and finances will always be important branches of the economy, but I think that manufacture is even more so. And in this sense, we should connect as much as possible with Albania, because it is naive to think that we are going to cooperate with the entire world, but not first of all and most of all with Albania. And I think we should nurture politically one natural tendency which already exists among two peoples of the same nature.
Because I've always thought, having come to the region for over 25 years, that Albanians are very entrepreneurial people. And you see this particularly when Albanians move to the United States. And many Albanians in America do extremely well, given the right conditions. So I always think it's let's say, the institutional, structural, economic conditions that are the governance conditions that are the problem, rather than, let's say, the energy of the people. So to impose any kind of socialist model on Albanians...
No, I was referring to social democracy, to the values and orientation of social democracy. And I think that government should be in close contact and cooperation with private sector. But as one of the scholars from Cambridge who inspired us in writing our program, government should be close with private sector, but not too close. So I think that the problem in Kosovo, and perhaps in certain years of transition also in Albania, is that the government was too close with the private sector. It should be close, but not too close.
We'll come back to some other economic issues. Well, one of the major problems, from what I understand in Kosovo, and maybe you can explain this to the audience in Albania in particular, is the let's say, people drain, the exodus of so many Kosovars in the past few months. Could you give us some statistics? How many people have left? Where have they gone? Who is leaving? Why they're leaving?
We do not know exactly how many people left, but we know that there is this range from 100,000 to 200,000. And I think that the majority of those people who left are lower middle class. They are not poor people, because you can see in the buses, people don't go because they don't have bread. They go because they need a job, or even a better job. Because in Kosovo, I think similarly to Albania, if you're a mother or father of the family, and in a family with 5 members, if you have only one salary, that is not going to do much good to you. So, and then not much of health insurance, social insurance, not much of pensions, you know. Albania and Kosovo are countries where is not very good for elderly and children. And they become really, really difficult countries if you have an illness in the family, for example. And you need to travel abroad or to have some expensive medicine and so on. And I think that, unfortunately, I must say, Albanians, poor Albanians, they have more shame for their poverty rather than anger. And I think that many of them decide to leave rather than oppose.
Than express themselves politically. Yeah.
Yes, and rather oppose those who are the cause of this problem. I think that people, it should be shameful for those who are stealing the public budget and public assets and resources and services and so on, and not for the people who are poor. They are not guilty for their own poverty. So I think that lower middle class is the strata of the society who most left. And, but again, with these neoliberal policies, we have only 2 ways on the same vehicle of transport. Is the bus, whether on the bus to Hungary or on the bus to protests. I think that there is no third way in this respect. However, I think that those people are leaving. Many of them will come back because there are not enough jobs for all of them who left. They will come back. Some of them will be returned by the authorities, Austrian, German, Hungarian, and so on. But those who are now here, they are even more angry than before because of this exodus. And I must say that one of the reasons why people leave is because we had exodus of money and later on exodus of people. 600 million euros of privatization fund are outside. 800 million euros of pensionist trust fund are also outside. 2 billion euros of commercial banks are outside. So the money is outside.
Outside meaning in foreign banks?
Yeah, foreign banks in Western Europe mainly. But you know, we cannot go to our own money. We have no visa liberalization. Kosovo is like a ghetto. So you have freedom for goods and money, but not for people. And this is very frustrating. I think money of diaspora helps us maintain this fragile peace that we have here.
What about remittances?
Yes.
They've also gone down.
It's 650 million euros last year, officially. Unofficially, close to 1 billion. I think that Irish diaspora and Greek diaspora, they probably bring more money back home, remittances. But budget of Kosovo is only $1.5 billion, slightly bigger than Montenegro. So in a way, this ratio 2 to 3, 1 billion euros from remittances and $1.5 billion the budget of the state, I really doubt if there is any other case in the world like this. So the fragile social peace that you see in the streets of Pristina is thanks to our brothers and sisters who send money back home. If they wouldn't send money to us, in 3 months we would collapse, not as a state, as a society.
Could there be an explosion here if this was the case?
I think weak state of Kosovo, which has become also captured state due to PDK, and now LDK is an attachment to PDK. I think that there is to become failed state and to have some explosion. Because, you know, this logic of keeping us away from explosion at the same time keeps us at the brink of explosion. So we have to demand much more, like development, progress, justice, democracy, and then you move really away from the crisis and from the explosion of crisis altogether.
We'll break now for some ads. Let me turn to another question that has been in the news, let's say, internationally with regard to Kosovo, and that's a dismissal of the Serbian minister Aleksandar Jablanovic in recent days, recent weeks. What is your view? Can you explain to an Albanian audience and also to an American audience what was behind this? Why was he pushed out? Why was he forced to resign? And in a bigger picture, should Serbs serve in the government in Kosovo?
Definitely, Serbs should serve in the government of Kosovo, but they should recognize that Kosovo is an independent country. Kosovo is a republic, and they should show loyalty toward the state that they will be serving. In the previous mandate, we had Serbs in the parliament of Kosovo who generally recognized independence and said Kosovo. And we had even some of them, a social democrat from Gračanica, who said Constitution of Republic of Kosovo. Because some of them said only Constitution of Kosovo. He even uses the word republic. But now, after this Serbian list, which is totally loyal to Belgrade, not to Pristina, and which has been created by Belgrade, I must say as a sort of a Chetnik formation, they changed so much toward the attitude of Serbs in the state of Kosovo toward these institutions and the society itself. So they are very much different from the Serbs who were in the previous mandate in their approach and stances. And this is very problematic for Kosovo because they have practically veto power on so many issues. For example, whether Kosovo will have an army or not cannot be done without approval of the Serbian list, which always has an open phone line with Vučić. So in a way, Kosovo ended up integrating Serbia inside the institutions instead of integrating Serbian community into Kosovar society. And I think that too many concessions in Brussels have accumulated into this political context in which Serbia is creating its own autonomous territorial entity in Kosovo, mainly in the north, but not limited in the north, and at the same time having its own instrument inside the government and inside the parliament of Kosovo. Mr. Jablanovic, he said something absolutely preposterous. He said, savages for the mothers of the missing who were protesting in Jakova and for the activists there of our movement. And at the same time, he said that, you know, there were no Serbian crimes and massacres in Kosovo. Later on, he tried to say that, oh, I was a teenager back then. But we found one interview of a couple of years ago when he said that he did not fight in the war, but he's sorry that he didn't manage because he was too young. And, but he compensates this in his psyche that he has many friends who were fighting in Morina and in Košare, two famous battles of Kosovo Liberation Army, so with Serbian forces. So in a way, he knows very well what happened here. And I think missing persons, damages of the war, people who got killed during the war are an open wound, and he was adding an insult to that. So we had a strong reaction. There were 20 small and medium-sized protests all over Kosovo, and then we had two massive ones on the 24th and 27th of January here in Pristina.
So what's the next step? Would there be a replacement?
He was dismissed. He was dismissed, but unfortunately, Prime Minister Mustafa did not dare say that I dismiss Jablanovic. He said that he's not anymore part of my cabinet. You know, it's so sad that what, for example, Prime Minister of Albania, Edi Rama, said to Vučić in Belgrade, Mustafa and Jablanovic cannot say to Jablanovic, Mustafa and Thaci cannot say to Jablanovic in Pristina. You know, so it's the threshold have gone very much down.
Why is that the case?
I think that because of EULEX here, because of the so-called special court that they want to install, the entire political establishment in Kosovo is terrified. Crimes of corruption and like allegedly a report of Dick Marty about organ harvesting and all those unbelievable horror stories, or they are very much afraid that, you know, if they do not behave, they will not only lose power, but also freedom. So I think that this is why they are obedient and servile beyond any imagination. Isa Mustafa was for 6 years mayor of Pristina before Vedvendosje winning here. And Isa Mustafa simply knows very well that there are 70 files in the office of the prosecutor of Pristina here, that in Kosovo, that basically there is too much evidence about crimes in the urban crimes regarding urban planning, giving licenses for building collective buildings and so on, and he knows very well that some of those might lead to his responsibility as well. So I think that this is the main reason why they are not really representing us, while they are not really defending the interests of.
This sounds like a form of blackmail. We'll open up files if you don't do as we say.
I think it is a form of blackmail. Everybody knows, nobody says it openly and publicly, but it is there.
Do you speak about this? I mean, do you report to Parliament about this?
Yeah, of course, and we mention this all of the time, but simply they avoid questions, and sometimes artificially they want to show that, oh, that's not the case. But actually it is very much the case. And in these political parties here in Kosovo now, we don't have much of party interest either. It's like rather personal interest, people with dossiers, with files, and prosecutors are not really acting. We have a very clumsy judicial system, but with its clumsiness, it functions at some other level, political level.
I've got one set of questions. I'm debating which ones. Let me follow one line here. You've been in government here in Pristina, local government. You arose as an anti-establishment party. Are you getting sucked into the establishment now? Are you becoming part of that establishment?
I think we're not becoming part of establishment. I think that that's always a danger. But at the same time, people noticed that us governing in Pristina is something completely different from what they have seen before. We have mayor who goes with a bus. We have who uses public transport. We have directors who nobody can say anything about them. None of them has any kind of business aside, because here the richest people in the country are politicians. They became the businessmen after entering politics. Okay, in US, also here, we had businessmen who enter politics. But here is the opposite. You have much more the other phenomena where the politicians become businessmen and they compete with other businessmen and they beat them in the market. So they saw that, you know, these are mainly middle-class people, intellectual, well-educated, and here at the service of people. And there is no illegal construction going on. At this moment, we're doing this interview nowhere in Pristina. And this is after 14 years that in Pristina we had this concrete jungle. Jungle made out of concrete and wild buildings popping up out of, I believe, money laundering. So there are changes in the city, and I think that by remaining middle class, by not getting richer through politics, by having open forums of debates within the organization, by participating with other activists in different protests and demonstrations, by maintaining the coherence of our discourse, I believe that we are going to maintain ourselves as a political movement, which I must say at present is the main opposition inside the parliament and outside the parliament. But even more so, we are the most active and profound opposition in Kosovo.
What have you actually accomplished in Pristina as local government? I mean, how much can you accomplish as a local government without full cooperation from the central government?
Well, we have been sabotaged by central government regarding the budget especially. However, we managed to govern in Pristina without doing coalition with others in the local assembly. And besides stopping illegal construction, now we have improved the situation regarding pupils in the primary schools, where they have one free meal per day. Then we have regular medical examination of all children in high schools and in primary schools. Then we are working in improving the public transport with European Bank on Reconstruction and Development. And I think that in a year's time, all these water restrictions will be over because our main promise was no restrictions regarding water supply. And public services regarding birth certificates, different kind of documents that people require in the municipality are provided very fast, and we started digitalization of the entire administration. So many things are much better. However, I'm afraid that many people thought that we are going to resolve their social problems while we are here only to provide better public services. And we cannot provide jobs with municipality. On the contrary, one of the problems we have is that we cannot expel some of the people who work there because courts are sending them back to us. We have 700 people in the administration of the municipality, and that is our main opposition. Paradoxically, our main opposition is not in the local assembly, it is in the administration itself, which stays there in order for us not to see some of the wrongdoings from the past. And because it was one party ruling there for 13 years. And of course, we do not want to expel them because they are from some other party. But if they perform bad and so on, or if they do, I don't know, like violations. But however, it's very difficult to do that. Out of 700 people, we managed to dismiss, I think, around 35 at best, which is like, yes, it is like 5%. So I think that this is one of the greatest problems, is reforming administration, so our vision gets implemented very fast.
So this is a question of the civil service reform, basically. At local level, presumably that also applies to national level.
There's probably even more so, but we do not have much experience. However, it is a very known thing in Kosovo that it's not that we just have a lot of corruption. We have the most primitive kind of corruption, that's nepotism. And without having certain surnames, you cannot get employed in as a civil servant. So there is like a very ironic situation, because during Yugoslavia, they used to call us by our surnames first and later on by our names. Like Bugajski, Kurti, Albin, and so on, you know. And now, all of a sudden, surname has become again more. We thought we have entered an era where the name is more important than surname, but again, is the surname which has become more important, especially when it comes to employment. And I think that this is because we don't have factories who produce like different kind of goods. And then the main factory for employment is bureaucracy. 80,000 people are in administration with doctors, professors, policemen, and so on. And if you multiply that by 3, let's say, you get the votes that the ruling parties are having in Kosovo. In addition, there are 38 independent state agencies, which are not that independent. And also, I think this has created a sort of a culture of corruption, even though I must say that corruption has no cultural roots. I think that this is a consequence of this model which has been installed from...
No cultural mean no ethnic roots, no...
Yes, and has nothing to do with the tradition of the society.
Sure.
Because, you know, we have been told that, oh, you Albanians are lazy, that's why you don't have jobs here. And
I've always said the opposite. Albanians are very hard working.
Exactly. And yes, and there is no American or German or British entrepreneur who was complaining that Albanians are lazy in Germany, UK, or US. So it's the system, I think. So Albanians are very hardworking, but simply they don't have a system in place. And I think family solidarity is a kind of substitution for economic development and state social assistance for citizens of our republic. So strangely, some people manage to survive through nepotism. That becomes a kind of survival instinct. But we should go beyond that. That was during the occupation. Now it should have not been like that. But I think that we forgot that NATO intervened after Kosovo Liberation Army started the Liberation War. Likewise, proper foreign investment in Kosovo will come after we start development of our country with our forces, including our diaspora and people, experts that we already have in Kosovo.
So employment should be based on merit and performance, not family connections, nepotism, and so forth, is what you're saying. Let me turn to the Trepča mine question, because that's another major issue for Kosovo. Can you explain again to an Albanian audience why Trepča is important economically, socially, and in other ways? And the other part of the question I have is, from what I understand it, you want it to be under state management. Given how you've described the state structure, wouldn't that open it up again to corrupt influences?
Well, of course, we have huge corruption in the government, but I think that when you have corruption in the government, privatization that corrupted government will do will be even higher corruption. So I think Trepča should not be, let's say, state-owned enterprise, but rather publicly owned enterprise, which is not that much different, but nonetheless. And it should not remain socially owned enterprise, as it is now, under the rule of Kosovo Privatization Agency, because it will end up liquidated by the special chamber. And simply, Trepča will be at the function of those who pretend that Trepča has debt toward them, rather than getting developed and employing people in industry. Trepča is very rich with lead, zinc, gold, and silver. But at the same time, these rare earth metals, indium, gallium, and germanium, Trepča is also rich. For example, touchscreen devices, they have indium, like your iPad. And Trepča is rich with that. And, but according to the experts of our movement, if we invest in Trepča less than 200 million euros, we could get value in exports up to 450 million euros according to the market prices just in the first year. But somebody has to do this initial investment. And I think that Kosovo can do that. Instead of focusing on new highways, it would be much better to focus on industrialization of the country because, you know, yes, national highway, but you need some national factories as well. Issa Mustafa withdrew, our prime minister withdrew from the goal to have a publicly owned enterprise out of Trepča because Vučić was complaining, prime minister of Serbia. So again, you have Belgrade there. Just like many conflicts around the world are where the resources are, likewise Mitrovica, I believe, is divided because of Trepča. If there wouldn't be Trepča, probably Mitrovica wouldn't be divided. But if there wouldn't be Trepča, you wouldn't have maybe Kosovo as it is. So division of Trepča and division of Mitrovica are basically two sides of the same coin. And I think that Prime Minister Mustafa wants to do a very bad thing to Trepča by giving authority to municipalities in whose territory are units of Trepča as socially owned enterprise. That means that municipality of Ljeposavić, Zvečan, Zubin Potok, and North Mitrovica, or the one in Nova Brda or Gračanica, for the mines of Trepča, they will have a say regarding registration of those units. And I think this has to do with the so-called Association of Serb Majority Municipalities, a deal which has been made in Brussels in 19th of April 2013. So instead of giving power to municipality over Trepča, we think that we should give power to Trepča over the entire Kosovo. Because if the law, as Mustafa has proposed, passes in the parliament, then Kosovo will become an association of municipalities, and Serb majority municipalities will become states on themselves, like something similar to Bosnia or to district of Brčko or things like that. Because I think that they try to replicate the same model also in Kosovo, and they use Trepča, which is very wealthy. Trepča does not owe to Serbia anything. First of all, Serbia didn't pay €1 for the war damages. They've burned or destroyed 120,000 houses during the last war. Then they stolen bank deposits of Kosovar people, the pensionist fund, and so on. They didn't pay anything back. On the other hand, Ahtisaari's plan made Kosovo part of Serbia's external debt. When Yugoslavia was disintegrated, we were not participating in sharing the wealth. Why we should share the debt if we do not share the wealth previously? So I think that Mustafa did a big mistake in considering the tendencies and aspirations of Serbia toward Trepča. Actually, even Ahtisaari's plan says that Trepča belongs to Kosovo.
What is your solution? To establish some sort of parliamentary oversight or management?
Yes, exactly. We think that Trepča should be a publicly owned enterprise. Of course, it will be linked with the government, but any kind of transformations in Trepča should be linked with some sort of qualified majority of 2/3 in the parliament of Kosovo. Not only with 61 votes. You would need 80 votes to change anything in Trepča. And let's not forget that Trepča has also has assets in Serbia and in Montenegro, in Plevlja, in Medveđa, in Kikinda, in Sombor, and so on. And you know what happened to those assets? Serbia and Montenegro privatized them all. So they did privatize them, and now they want not to allow Trepča to become a publicly owned enterprise. They want to liquidate it here as well. So we end up in different international courts. According to our experts, law is on our side regarding Trepča, but you have to back it politically by the government, which I'm afraid at present is not really happening.
This takes us back to a bigger question I had is, what is your view of the Serbian-Kosovo dialogue in general? I mean, is it a positive thing, or is it a negative thing?
I think that some of the problems that we have with Serbia are problems of 19th century, of the beginning of 20th century, and especially problems from the Balkan Wars, I must say, or historical problems. I don't think that Albanians as a nation were fighting Serbia as a state because we're not having enough dialogue or because we did not know each other. I think that wars are as a result of conflicting interests. And we did not fight Serbs. We fought Serbia as a state. And we did not have our own state. We fought as Albanian nation. And I could say now, as some, let's say, IR scholars would have put it, in the Balkans, there can be no war without Serbia and no peace without Albanians. Albanians are a peaceful nation, but you cannot have peace without them. And this dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia is without any conditions for Serbia and for internal issues of Kosovo. That's why the ultimate result of this dialogue will be Bosniazation of Kosovo. We must put some conditions towards Serbia. For example, I've just met now Mr. Han, the Commissioner for Enlargement and Neighborly Relations. And of course, you know, yes, EU Commissioner. Of course, I want good neighborly relations with Serbia. But first of all, Serbia must become our neighbor. And Serbia must recognize us as her neighbor. Serbia is not even a bad neighbor, because Serbia is the worst possible neighbor by saying that you're not neighbor at all. Your house belongs to me. So I also said to EU Commissioner Hahn that, you know, if you want normalization of relations, it is Serbia who should change, not us. We're doing a lot of changes in Kosovo to normalize the relations with Serbia as if Kosovo is a problem, when we know very well that Serbia is the problem. So I think in Brussels we're not having a fair dialogue, since in addition to all what I've said, EU is in conflict of interest by mediating the dialogue, because they have executive powers over us. They don't recognize us. They have no executive powers over Belgrade, and they recognize Serbia, and they mediate. You've noticed that when Mustafa was there, behind him was not any sign of state of Kosovo. It was EU, while behind Vučić was flag of Serbia. So I think that there is a lot of asymmetric elements in this dialogue, which will end up with harmful results for Kosovo.
So do you think this union of Serb municipalities, as it is called, could end up turning Kosovo into another multi-entity type of Bosnian state, dysfunctional state? Is that the danger?
I think this is a goal of Serbia, and I think that they have great chances to achieve this through dialogue in Brussels. And Serbia is advancing inside Kosovo through this dialogue, strengthening its positions, and is advancing toward EU. When Kosovo got footnote, asterisk, in its name, Serbia got candidate status. And when Kosovo signed the agreement with Serbia about Serb majority municipalities forming an association inside Kosovo, then Serbia started negotiations for accession into EU. So I think that this is very problematic for us, because Serbia is marching in both directions, and we are stuck in our state building process, where we have done some steps in reverse mode. Because, you know, 7 years, it's not 7 weeks, it's 7 years after declaration of independence. And with the exception of the increase of the number of recognitions that we got, we cannot see much progress in other respects, really.
How do you interpret, and again for our Albanian audience in Albania, how do you interpret Prime Minister Rama's historic visit to Belgrade recently, and the fact that Vučić may at some point come to Tirana sometime this year?
I think that what Rama said in Belgrade postpone the visit of Vučić to Tirana. I think that probably Vučić was thinking much earlier to come to Tirana. But what Rama said was not something that unknown either to Vučić. The point was that he said it in Belgrade to Vučić publicly. And that the fact that we got so much enthusiastic about that declaration maybe also says that our expectations are very low for our own politicians. But however, I think it was good what he said, and let's hope that he continues in that manner, because one thing is to set a standard, but another thing is to maintain really that.
How do you see relations developing? You mentioned earlier it's a natural process between Tirana and Pristina, between Kosovo and Albania. Presumably the closer Albania moves towards the European Union, in terms of now has candidate status, if they start accession talks, if they meet some of the conditions, the acquis communautaire is opened up, presumably it will become more of an attraction for Kosovo. In other words, potential future unification or closer links?
I think there should be unification. The border between Albania and Kosovo is not Albanian border, it's a border of Yugoslavia and Serbia. And on the other hand, it is our security and economic interest to get together. We are one nation. And Albanian nation should not be reduced to kinship, to the fact of kinship, but also we should emphasize the political idea of unification. And we know very well the famous saying of Paško Vasa that the religion of Albanians is Albanianism, and we like to say it in a kind of relaxed way. But if you think a bit more about it, it's really interesting. For example, so many names among Albanians is Flamur. So many names among Albanians is Bashkim. So can you imagine in some other nation somebody naming their child the flag or unification? You know, it doesn't really work. But among Albanians, that's the most natural thing. So I think that when one thinks about Albanian nation, especially in political terms, that's also an idea. It's not a cultural fact of kinship and links, of language and tradition and common consciousness about history. It's also this political idea, and I think that makes Albanian nationalism progressive, and we should not give up that. We are not demanding to go to Kraljevo, you know, where the Albanians are the vast majority, starting with Kosovo and Albania first of all. I think that we should get together, and we could be very much complementary because of Albania is more Mediterranean, Kosovo is more continental climate. We have mines and metals and field. Albania has mountains and sea. So I think that it would work pretty well. On the other hand, I have heard much more arguments against unification of Kosovo with Albania from some Albanians themselves than from international diplomats and politicians. I think that once we really will want to unify as political elites, because ordinary citizens, they, I think, generally do, then international community will switch, and they will also...
Is this part of the Veta Vendosia program, unification, up front? Yeah.
We in our first third of our program, we elaborate on this, and we say that we should have the right to join Albania. And it's not fair to ask us, do you want to join Albania when we're not allowed to have the right, first of all, Article 1.3 of our Constitution. And then once we, because Kosovo has been taken from Albania, Kosovo must be given back to Albania. And while division of Kosovo, separation of Kosovo from Albania was done in violent manner, in non-democratic manner, we want to unify in peaceful democratic manner. Through referendum, where people could declare their will, whether they want to join or not. Okay, Scotland said no. Let's try what happens in Kosovo and Albania.
Well, except that was the other way around. They wanted to leave. But the point I'm making, paradoxically, is if there is more disparity between the progress of Albania towards EU and Kosovo, which, as you say, is being in a way held back because of internal factors, international factors, the aspirations, because of people's interests, presumably would grow to join a country that's becoming more successful. In other words, paradoxically, the unification sentiments may grow the less successful Kosovo is in comparison to Albania. Would you agree with that?
I think that this is deeper, the will of Albanians to unify is deeper than actual successes of our two countries. So I think that we should rely on, let's say, two principles. The first is that unification of Kosovo and Albania is not against European Union. And the second is that unification of Kosovo and Albania cannot be substituted via European Union. So we don't go against, but neither we can be given something else instead of unifying here. And I think that the case of unification would be very much like the case of unification of two Germanys when it comes to unification. While when it comes to referendum as a principle, which embodies the right to self-determination, we had now recently in Scotland. It's a European value, and there are so many referendums in Switzerland. Some complain too many, but referendum is here to stay. So I think that people's will, the sublime principle, democratic principle of self-determination and referendum, should be the method, and national unification as a goal, I think, goes beyond maybe who joins first EU and so on. I'm one thing afraid. If Serbia joins EU before Albania, then it will be a mess. And this is my greatest worry, because I think that maybe there are different circles in Brussels who would think of this as well, because they are afraid that Serbia might go toward Russia. So let's take Serbia prior to Albania, but once Serbia is prior to Albania member of EU, they might block Albania and Kosovo. So I think Greece is doing nothing to Macedonia what Serbia will do to Albania and to Kosovo if she gets before us into EU.
So you need simultaneous entry.
Yes, I think that the 6 still non-integrated countries of Western Balkans should join EU at the same time, like they did 10 of them in 2004.
We'll break now for some ads. Let me turn to one interesting question. You mentioned Greece, which gives me a good segue into what's happened in Greece in the past few weeks, the election of what's called a hard left or ultra-left Syriza movement. Though it's very varied. It's a very broad coalition. How do you compare to Syriza? I've heard from some people that Vete Vendosja is Albania's Syriza. How would you respond to that?
I must say that I'm not very familiar with the policies of Syriza in Greece. I just know them as, I don't know, PR impression. But I really don't know. And on the other hand, I think that we should wait for 6 months to a year and see what they really do.
If they last that long?
Yes, I don't know. I think that we should see what will their policies be. And it's very important their geopolitical positioning. Because I think that we shall see their answers regarding several issues, and in particular, their relation toward EU and Russia. This is the most important, because if they orient themselves toward EU, if they want better relations with Albania, then PASOK and New Democracy, then probably that could be a very good ground for cooperation.
Would they recognize Kosovo, for example?
Well, yes, that for sure. But also I think that Greece has not been good to Albania either. So I think that they've always seen it as a second-rank country. comparing to themselves. So I think that they need a new approach toward Albanians as a nation. And here they should include better relations with Albania and also recognizing independence of Kosovo. I think that maybe they cannot do it, I don't know, this month, but we should not wait for next year to see what their stances on this should be.
You mentioned their position on Russia. Syriza has been very supportive of Russia's policy in Ukraine, the attack on Ukraine. How do you see from perspective, I know it's not a major issue here in Kosovo as it isn't in Albania, but do you see greater Russian, let's say, influences, attempts to exert their influences in the region, to promote frozen conflicts such as in Bosnia, potentially in Kosovo, potentially in Macedonia? Do you see a more aggressive Russian role here?
I think that Putin in some respects is copying Milosevic. He wants to carve out Republika Srpska in Ukraine, and for me it's very clear. It's very sad that some European countries, they try to create some bilateral relations with Russia at the expense of European Union and at the expense of security of European Union. And we know very well that EU and NATO go hand in hand, and you cannot have one without really having the other. So I think that there should be a very decisive answer to Putin. And any kind of comparison between Crimea and Kosovo, as Putin was trying to do, was not that... yeah, it's not that basically he was saying that Crimea is like Kosovo. But you should read this the other way around. Kosovo might become like Crimea. So actually he was showing his hegemonic expansionist aspirations. We need weaker Russia in the Balkans, but weaker Russia in the Balkans should not have as a consequence stronger Serbia in the Balkans, because this is the card that Vučić is playing. Okay, I might distance myself a bit from Russia, but let me get stronger here in my neighborhood with satellites like Republika Srpska and north in Kosovo and so on, similar to Belarus, eastern Ukraine and Crimea till South Ossetia and Abkhazia. So they want to use the same logic. I think that US was fighting Russia 35 years ago in Afghanistan. And I think that now they will have to fight Russia in Ukraine. And we can discuss how it can be done, when it can be done, but I cannot see how it can be avoided. Following the Russian policy, following this bitterness of Putin out of the Yeltsin era, like trying to somehow correct history, trying to have like a kind of resurrection of Russian Empire, either from like Great Peter or Stalin. So I think this is his imaginary about himself and Russia, and while knowing very well that the opposition is very weak, I think that it's difficult to really avoid confrontation. On the contrary, I think that some forceful decisiveness of the West toward Russia can actually prevent conflict. So I think it is the decisiveness which can save us all. And I am worried because now, as I said, the conflict was happening in Afghanistan. Now we have it in Europe. We can freely say that Europe is at war. And by knowing the links between Serbia and Russia, of course, that it concerns Kosovo a lot.
They also have other links in the Balkans, as you know. They've had with Montenegro, with Bulgaria. That's a more traditional ally in some ways.
It is true, but this South Stream pipeline is not going through Bulgaria. So I think that this is a very good news for the Balkans and for the entire Europe. And we know very well the thesis of Huntington about clashes of civilization. But we have seen now, as Professor Blerim Reka has pointed out, that you have cooperation between Putin and Erdogan rather than Putin with Bulgaria. So, so within civilizations.
Well, actually, it brings me nicely to the next question I have, which is religion. What do you think should be the role of religion in politics? There has been a growth of radical Islam in different countries around the world. How does it affect Kosovo? Do you see more of a role of religion here?
I think that the role of religion probably increased a bit because Islam has changed in the entire world. And it's naive to think that once Islam is changing everywhere, it will remain the old one among Albanians. However, I think that Albanians have enough tradition, values, and capacities to maintain issue and the project of national unification above and beyond any kind of sectarianism. I don't think that Albanians had religious tolerance. I think that tolerance is a negative word. I think that we always had religious coexistence. And still nowadays in different kind of ceremonies you can see priests and imams together. So I think that there is not much danger as people think. The danger for Albanian people in general are rather aspirations of Serbia on one hand against Kosovo, and poverty and unemployment on the other.
But could poverty and unemployment radicalize?
Yeah, I think that some yes. Because to the poor people of Kosovo, for example, they have more or less three alternatives. One is nepotism and clientelism with the ruling party. Second is emigration. And third one is religious extremism. But their numbers is still, I believe, in dozens, not yet in hundreds. And I hope it will not ever reach there. But it has to do very much with socioeconomic development. But I think that religious extremism, especially Islamic one, should not be combated from anti-theist position or from the positions of Islamophobia. We should also be careful in this respect. Neither Islamophobia, neither extremist Islam.
But I mean, presumably Vetëvendos is very outspoken against radical jihadism, which it's almost, let's say, an intolerant, non-coexistent view of religion.
Yes, and I think that we made this very clear. However, we think we differ from other parties here because we think that we should not fight this extremist Islam or radical jihad in the name of the Western civilization or in the name of another religion, but in the name of the values of Albanian nation. Because I think if we fight in religious extremism in the name of be it Western civilization or US as the superpower of the world, then that shows lack of confidence in our own nation. Of course, we should join other nations in combating terrorism, religious terrorism. But we should not say that we are insufficient, because it's not just that I love Albanian nation, I also have a lot of confidence in it. I think that we have great values, and we can be an example to the others.
You have one of the most remarkable forms of religious coexistence, particularly in Albania, where I travel very often. Very rarely anywhere in the world do people from different religions marry and their children are even brought up in a different tradition. I mean, it's remarkable. It's something you should cultivate.
And I think one of the reasons is, perhaps not the only one, and especially maybe not even the main one, is that we are autochthonous and very ancient people here. So we are before religions, really. So I think that by being in one hand surrounded with...
Before the major religion.
Yes, exactly. Yes, it's like, and it's no wonder then Van Noli said that Albanians are pagans with three religions, you know. So I think there is a lot of truth into that.
And also a lot of coexistence with atheists, which is another strong tradition.
So in a way, exactly, if you are really religious, uh, you emphasize cooperation, solidarity, and not hostility and adversaries. But I think that there are tendencies in the world for political goals to use religion. And that is not going to go away soon. I think that to expel the religion completely from politics is not possible. On the other hand, to depoliticize the religion, that's not also possible. But I believe in secular states where we have cohabitation and even cooperation of different religions. And again, I believe within the frame of some socio-democratic model, because I think that religions should focus much more on social issues. And I think that here we lag a bit behind, because just like politicians, some of our imams and priests happen to be the richest people in the country as well. So I think that religions, they advocate humbleness, modesty, and they should, besides spiritualism, they should focus very much on social issues and not only in political materialism, as sometimes is the case.
It's part of the appeal of jihadism, where they say the clergy or the imams don't really follow the Quran, that they benefit from worldly goods and so on and so forth. So it delegitimizes official religion.
Yeah, and sometimes it looks as if some of them envy the most degenerate, filthy politicians and businessmen. You know, it's like as if they envy, and then you lose respect even at some initial level, let alone.
My very last question, because we've unfortunately run out of time. This went very quickly. I have many more questions, but I'm going to stick to one. Some have accused you of anti-Americanism because of your criticism of what you've called interference by some ambassadors in the internal politics. We talked about this earlier as well in terms of European Union and so forth. How do you see the role of America in Kosovo? Is it positive? Is it negative? What could be done to improve it?
I think that the US could help us much more than they do, but we are not main focus anymore. And I think that US helped us way more during the war for liberation than during the peace for development and democratization. And I think that there has been a kind of contrast between the policies advocated by US ambassadors in Kosovo on one hand and the changes that Obama brought in US from his discourse to some of his policies. I think that having obedient and servile politicians in Kosovo also didn't help, because, you know, US couldn't pay too much attention to Kosovo when there are other crises lurking around the world, and so many nations expect US to help and save them. I must say that some of the US ambassadors here were not good, especially Ambassador Dell, who forced, imposed a contract with Bechtel, and now he is in the payroll of Bechtel, according to the British newspaper Guardian. And he also elected our president from, his famous president from the envelope. There has been a lot of authoritarian intrusions in the last minute, you know, and this is not okay. And I think that, however, the good relationship of Kosovar citizens, of Albanian nation in general with US cannot be harmed by certain ambassadors. However, it would be much better to have different kind of ambassadors, I must say. And I think that Mr. Dell, not only that he wanted Albanians to love US, he wanted Albanians to love him. And he wanted Albanians to love him like Borat, you know, in this movie, Borat from Kazakhstan visiting US, when he goes to US and says that I came to marry Pamela Anderson, you know. So they want this kind of idiotic love. You know, and I think healthy relationships, long-term relationships, cannot be maintained with this approach that Mr. Dell was conducting here. I think that Albanian nation should move its relations with US to a new strategic level, to change qualitatively our cooperation, and not to be just to protect us, not to be attacked by our neighbors, but at the same time to fully cooperate in two respects: partners in economy and allies in military aspect. And I think that we could have done much, much more than we did in these two levels. It's a shame that Philip Morris went to Niš and bought the factory of cigarettes there in Niš, and we do not have, except Bechtel, no other major investment from US in Kosovo. And I think that US investors in Kosovo and Albania should have been much more present. And I think from our cooperation with Albania, Albania and Kosovo should have had a much stronger and greater army than we do.
Albin Kurti, leader of Veta Vendosia here in Pristina, Kosovo, thank you very much for hosting us at your headquarters, and I'm sure we'll have you back on the show very soon.
Thank you very much for this great opportunity, for this great discussion.
Thank you.
My second commentary on an important European topic is entitled Europe's Jihad. The atrocities in France and other places may be the start of a terrorist backlash in Europe. Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State are reportedly planning a broader campaign of revenge against EU countries for their participation in a bombing campaign that has reversed some of its gains in Iraq and Syria. Over the past year, IS has developed a strong European connection. Over 18,000 Islamist recruits have flocked to the rebels, including approximately 3,000 European citizens, mostly from Western Europe, and including at least 700 radicals from France, 500 from the United Kingdom, 320 from Germany, 250 from Belgium, and 120 from Holland. Security officials are concerned that Islamic recruits with Western passports can travel to Syria and Iraq and then return home with deadly skills and terrorist contacts and stage attacks on domestic targets. Paradoxically, despite the scares over jihadists in the Balkans, it is Western Europe that faces the most immediate threat from homegrown radicals. Jihadist ideology has wide appeal because of its disregard for social hierarchies. It fills an ideological, social, and political vacuum and convinces converts that they are following the original tenets of Islam and the teachings of the Quran. Religious righteousness provides a unifying bond across ethnic boundaries and enables insurgents to recruit outside their communities and to campaign for the creation of a regional structure styled as a caliphate. They are enabled by a liberal Europe without internal border controls and can hide within a multitude of diverse Muslim communities. A major terrorism threat can disrupt EU diplomacy, business, tourism, investment, and trade. Successful terrorist operations, or even frequent terrorist threats, can undermine public confidence in the government. The authorities will be viewed as weak and unable to protect citizens if they fail to thwart terrorist plans. And paradoxically, the same people who criticize US intelligence surveillance will complain that such monitoring is not extensive enough in Europe to prevent terrorist attacks. Unfortunately, we have already come to the end of today's show. I have greatly enjoyed being with you and my colleagues here at Albanian Screen as ever. Good night, everyone. Stay healthy, be productive, and remain optimistic, and see you all very soon. Mirupavshim.